It started with a single scrap of chicken left on a weathered porch. Every evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills of the quiet Missouri town, Eleanor placed a small plate of food outside her back door. She didn't know where the dog came from, only that he showed up around dusk, silent and skittish, his ribs pressing against a dusty coat, his eyes always watching. Eleanor was 67, retired, and alone. Her husband had passed 5 years earlier, and the house had grown too quiet, too still. Her children had moved to other states long ago. The dog, this thin, cautious creature, was the only visitor who returned regularly. She never tried to approach him. There was a mutual understanding. She provided the food, and he accepted it without thanks, without growling, without trust. He never crossed the threshold, never wagged his tail, just ate slowly, then vanished back into the tree line like smoke. The neighbors called him Ghost. No one claimed him. Animal control tried once to catch him, but failed. Eleanor simply called him Boy, and each night she left a little more food, a little closer to the porch, hoping he'd get used to her scent. After 3 weeks, she noticed something odd. The food began to disappear faster, not just nibbled, but devoured. Then, one night, she left a piece of roast beef and stepped away for just a moment. When she returned to the window, she saw something strange. The dog wasn't eating. He was gently grasping the meat in his mouth, then turning, carrying it back into the woods. She blinked. The next night, the same thing happened. He didn't eat. He took. He carried. Always in the same direction. Curiosity tugged at her, but Eleanor didn't follow. She wasn't afraid of the dog. She was afraid of what might lie beyond her safe little backyard. So instead, she began watching, waiting, wondering. What was he doing with the food? A week passed like this. Then another. The dog came like clockwork. He never stayed more than a minute. But one evening, he didn't come at all. Eleanor waited up, worried in a way that surprised even her. She found herself standing by the window past midnight, her porch light still on, calling into the night softly. Boy? Nothing. Morning came, then afternoon. Still no sign. The absence made her chest ache. Not just for the dog, but for the ritual, the connection, the tiny sliver of purpose she'd felt returning. She told herself he'd moved on, that maybe someone else had taken him in. But the way he had looked at her, cautious but not afraid, it had meant something. Hadn't it? 2 days later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Eleanor heard a sound that made her drop her teacup. A faint, sharp bark. She ran to the door, heart pounding. There he was, standing on the edge of the yard, tail rigid, staring straight at her. But something was different. Something was clutched in his mouth. A bundle. No, not a bundle. A baby. Wrapped in a tattered blanket, limp but breathing. Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The dog moved closer, inch by inch, as if delivering a sacred offering. And then, gently, he placed the child at her feet. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't move. Her breath caught in her throat as the stray stepped back, his eyes still locked on hers. The baby, a little girl, no older than a few months, was swaddled in a thin blanket, her tiny fist curled near her mouth. Her skin was pale, her lips trembling, but she was alive. Eleanor dropped to her knees. "Oh my God," she whispered, scooping the infant up gently. The baby whimpered softly, but didn't cry. Her skin was cold. She smelled faintly of earth and pine needles. Without thinking, Eleanor rushed inside, cradling the child close to her chest. She turned up the heat, wrapped her in blankets, and called 911 with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain what had just happened. The dispatcher paused. "Ma'am, did you say a dog brought you a baby?" "Yes," Eleanor said breathlessly. He carried her to my porch, like he knew I'd help. An ambulance arrived in minutes. Red lights bathing the quiet street. Paramedics took the infant gently and began warming her body as they checked her vitals. One of them turned to Eleanor. "You may have saved her life," he said. "Whoever left this baby didn't want her found." Eleanor stood on the porch, arms empty now, staring at the woods. The dog was gone again. The next day, Child Protective Services and a local sheriff came to ask questions. Eleanor told them everything she knew. The sheriff, a kind man named Harris, raised his brows skeptically. "You're telling me a stray dog carried a baby to your porch? From where? And how would he know where to bring her?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "But he's been coming here for weeks. I think he was trying to tell me something." Sheriff Harris looked at her for a long moment before finally saying, "Well, ma'am, stranger things have happened. The baby was taken to the county hospital and nicknamed Miracle by the nurses. She was severely underweight, dehydrated, but stable. No signs of abuse, just neglect and exposure." In the following days, Eleanor couldn't shake the image of the dog's eyes, intelligent, solemn, almost pleading. She started walking the woods behind her home, calling softly, "Boy, where did you find her?" She brought food again, left it in the usual spot, but he didn't return. Then, on the fourth night, as a heavy mist rolled in, she heard a rustling in the trees. He was back. This time, Eleanor didn't move. She crouched low on the porch, holding a plate of cooked beef, whispering, "Come on, boy. Show me." He didn't come to her, but he barked once, then turned and walked toward the woods. After a few steps, he paused and looked back. It was an invitation. Eleanor hesitated, grabbed a flashlight, and followed. They walked in silence for nearly half a mile through pine and ash, over damp moss and fallen branches. The dog led confidently, pausing only to make sure she was still following. Eventually, they reached a cluster of large rocks near a creek bed. And there, beneath an overhang, tucked into a crude nest of leaves and old blankets, was a second bundle. Eleanor gasped, but it wasn't another child. It was the baby's mother, a young woman, no older than 20, pale and unconscious. Her body curled protectively as if she'd collapsed trying to shield her daughter. There were empty water bottles and scraps of granola wrappers nearby, along with signs she had given everything she had to keep the baby alive. Eleanor dropped to her knees and checked for a pulse. It was weak, but there. She called 911 again, her voice shaking. Rescue teams arrived quickly, this time using ATVs to get through the rough terrain. The woman was taken to the hospital. She remained in critical condition, but she had a chance. As she was lifted onto the stretcher, Eleanor looked at the dog, who hadn't moved from the edge of the clearing. "You led me to them," she whispered. Over the next week, the town was abuzz with the story. News crews came. The local paper ran a headline, "Stray dog saves infant's life and leads rescuer to mother." The hospital confirmed that the woman had likely given birth in the woods. She'd run away from a dangerous domestic situation, hoping to protect her child. With nowhere to go, she survived for days alone until her body gave out. But the dog, he'd watched, protected them both. And when the mother could no longer care for the child, he did the unthinkable. He brought her to someone he trusted, to Eleanor. When the young woman awoke days later, her first words were about her baby. She cried when they told her the infant was safe, recovering well. And when Eleanor came to visit, holding the little girl in her arms, the mother reached out and wept with gratitude. They named the baby Hope. Eleanor asked gently, "Do you remember the dog?" The young woman nodded slowly. "He showed up one night when I was too scared to move. I shared what little food I had. He never left after that. He watched over us." Sheriff Harris and the hospital staff discussed what to do with the dog. He had no collar, no chip, no name. He had survived on instinct and heart. Eleanor already knew what she wanted. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in her small kitchen, preparing a warm meal, not for herself, but for the dog who had changed everything. He had finally allowed her to touch him. Not right away, not with ease, but with patience and soft-spoken words. She named him Shadow, for the way he used to appear at dusk and vanish just as quietly. Shadow had become a permanent fixture on her back porch, then inside her home. He was no longer a stray. He was family. The town rallied around the story. Donations poured in to support the young mother, whose name was Emily. She had fled an abusive relationship in another state, terrified and pregnant, determined to protect her child at any cost. With no one to turn to, she'd wandered until her body gave out, but not before fate intervened in the form of a silent, loyal protector. Emily made a full recovery. When she was strong enough, she sat with Eleanor on the porch, watching the sunset. Hope, now chubby and smiling, lay between them on a blanket, reaching for Shadow's tail. "She saved me," Emily whispered, gazing at her daughter. "But he saved us both." Eleanor nodded. "And you all saved me too." It was true. The days no longer felt hollow. The house rang again with laughter, tiny cries, the patter of paws on tile. Eleanor hadn't expected any of this. She had simply fed a hungry dog, and in return, he'd returned her life. Months passed. Emily found work at the local bakery, and Eleanor helped care for Hope while she saved for a small apartment nearby. But they were no longer just neighbors or chance acquaintances. They were a family built not by blood, but by compassion, survival, and something far greater: connection. One afternoon, as they all walked through the town square, a child pointed from across the street. "That's the hero dog, Mommy." People still stopped to meet Shadow, who bore the attention with his usual quiet dignity. He didn't crave praise. He didn't understand the headlines. He had only done what felt right. And that, perhaps, was what made him extraordinary. The story would live on. In news, articles, in retellings at the diner, and one day, in Hope's own words, when she was old enough to understand how close the edge had been, and how a dog, once nameless and alone, had carried her across it. At night, Eleanor sometimes looked out at the trees, remembering how it all began. A plate of food, a pair of eyes in the dark, a quiet trust formed in silence. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with trumpets or grand entrances. Sometimes they arrive on 4 tired legs, with a heart full of loyalty and a child in their jaws, whispering through action alone, "Please help." If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this again. Like the video if you believe in the power of kindness. Share it with someone who needs a little light today. And when you're ready for your next journey, watch the next story. we promise it's just as unforgettable.